Hey guys, I'm home. It's snowing pretty good out there. Hey honey, for dinner I was thinking we could... Whoa! Oh man, I need to do something about all these boots. It's time to go build a boot tray. I started out by gathering all the leftover cedar I had laying around from other projects and began ripping it down to 1-inch strips to use as the rungs for the boot tray. Now that I have this cedar cut to strips of 1 inch by 3/4 of an inch, the boot tray is going to be about 1 foot wide, so I need to cut these each to 12 inches in length. While I listened to a motivational guru tell me that I too can be an expert woodworker, I cut down 39 plus a few extra of these rungs to go across the length of the boot tray. Part of the boot tray is a 55-inch long lattice structure made from cedar wood. I've already cut those short horizontal pieces, so I now need to cut some 1-inch wide, 55-inch long pieces from this long piece of cedar that I have left over from the garden build that I did this summer. Over at my super custom and expensive miter station, I ripped the long runner boards down to length and then headed over to the table saw to rip them down to a width of 1 inch. Here's where things get a little experimental. I want to be able to slide a piece of acrylic under the horizontal strips of the lattice so that any water or dirt or snow that drip through land on that acrylic, and then in the future I can slide it out, wash it off, slide it back in, and then that junk's not getting on the floor. I'm going to go ahead and cut a dado down these 2 strips, and hopefully the acrylic will just be able to slide into that. The thickness of the acrylic I picked up was slightly thinner than the kerf of my blade, so it was just a matter of 1 pass through the table saw on each side to get a nice slot for the acrylic to be able to slide through. Now that I've got these grooves cut in these 2 long side support pieces, I should be able to insert a piece of acrylic into the groove that I cut. This piece of acrylic will be used to catch any mud, snow, or water that drips off the boots. Then I can slide it back out every once in a while, rinse it off, and put it back in. With everything cut to length, it's now time to do the big glue up. I'm going to go ahead and glue down and clamp the end pieces, make sure everything's squared back, and then come back and glue in all the other pieces. Gluing up a 55-inch boot tray using a 32-inch table saw as your workbench is a bit of a challenge, but I like to live life on the edge. Using spacers, I evenly positioned out the rest of the rungs. This definitely took a lot of time and a lot of patience and would have benefited greatly from an Audible sponsorship. Blue tape provided sufficient clamping pressure for most of the rungs, but in the middle I decided to throw on a couple of clamps to resolve any bowing issues with the long side pieces. After an eternity of gluing and taping and placing rungs, I finally reached the end of the boot tray and even had some blue tape and Titebond 3 glue left to spare. After giving it sufficient drying time, I came back and removed all the blue tape and was happy to find that I had no loose rungs on the boot tray. It looks like the glue up turned out great, but let's go ahead and test it out. Sounds great. Next steps are to cut the acrylic that's going to slide in underneath, and then I'm going to go ahead and build a frame that goes around the whole thing and covers up the edges. This piece of acrylic and the long board that I used for the frame of the boot tray are the only pieces that I bought for the project. Everything else was leftover scrap wood that I had laying around. It's easy to cut acrylic on your table saw, just make sure you're wearing safety glasses because it can kick back some small little plastic pieces at you. I just needed to add a board to my fence to prevent the acrylic from sliding underneath it while pushing across the table saw. Finally, it was time to cut the pieces for the frame. I found this great piece of cedar that had a beautiful grain pattern in it that I first ripped to width at the table saw and then took over to the chop saw to cut to length and to miter the corners on. Now it's time to glue the frame up. I want to use the inner section for reference as I'm putting the frame together, so I went ahead and put blue tape on the corners so that I don't accidentally glue the frame to the inner piece. I used a ton of blue tape on this project and had to scour the entire house looking for random rolls that the kids have borrowed off my workbench in order to hang up their pictures. But this tape worked out great to hold these corners together until I could get my strap clamp around the boot tray. After many attempts to get this band clamp wrapped around the boot tray, I finally succeeded and left it for a few hours to allow the glue to dry. After a few hours of drying time, I removed the band clamp and cleaned up all the blue tape. I then used my brad nailer to put a few nails into each corner to add some reinforcement. In hindsight, I wish I would have used pocket holes on the inside instead of brad nails on the outside so that everything would have been hidden, but really you can hardly see the brad nails at all. So that I could get more glue all over my hands and use up the rest of my blue tape, I decided to glue a few scrap pieces of cedar to the inside of the frame. This will give the inner ladder something to rest on And if the boot tray ever needs to be moved, it can be moved as one piece but still be two separate pieces. Next it came time for lots and lots of sanding, and I immediately regretted not sanding the tops of these rungs before gluing everything together. The sander kept catching on the sides of each rung while going back and forth, and it made it very difficult to get everything smoothed out. Now we've come to the sanding segment where I give the obligatory like and subscribe comment. It seems a bit cliche, but it does really motivate me to keep churning out more videos when those numbers go up. Finally, it was time to apply finish to the project. I went ahead and just used some shellac because I already had it sitting around, and it's such a fun word to say. Shellac is actually a natural product. It comes from the secretions of a bug that you can find on trees in India and Thailand. Now that I've got the finish all applied, I just need to assemble everything up. First is slide in the acrylic pieces and then put the center structure into the frame. I think the boot tray turned out great, and I love how I can still see the hardwood floors through that clear acrylic. I'll have to reevaluate that in the future though. Once the snow starts melting off the boots, if it's able to seep through that acrylic, I may need to add a bottom to the frame to catch that water. That's what's great about making something yourself though. You can change it however you want, and you get to fix it yourself too. One thing I would change about this boot tray if I had it to do over again is I would have raised that frame a little bit higher. That way that spacer that I glued to the bottom would have more surface area to glue onto. I'm sure it's going to break off in the future, but if it does, I'll just fix it. If you liked this video, feel free to scroll down below and click that like button. And while you're down there, if you don't want to miss my future videos, feel free to click that subscribe button. Until then, I've got more projects to work on in the shop. Hey guys, I'm home. Whoa! Oh man, I gotta do something about all these snow pants. It's a good looking boot tray though. Back to the shop.